Good evening, everyone. It is 5 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and call this City Council workshop to order. Note for the record that all members of council are present and accounted for. As always, we begin our meetings with a Pledge of Allegiance, so if you're willing and able, please stand and join us. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And if you're working from the printed agenda for this evening, I want to go ahead and make a little housekeeping move. Switching around the priorities of the order from the printed agenda says the executive session would be held first. We're not going to do the executive session first. What we'd like to do is go ahead and begin with the work session items, the downtown parking management update. Is there anyone who has any objection to that change? All right. We'll go ahead and do that. So, Mr. Lagerbloom, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Mayor. Members of the City Council. So this need to walk us through a little bit about how we've gotten to this point tonight, and then I'll probably start with, like I do sometimes, with the end of where I'm hoping to get to, and then see if I can build you all along the way that we're all comfortable in agreement moving forward with ultimately what would be phase one in the downtown parking management. So you've identified this as a priority multiple times in a couple of our different retreats, that we implement a downtown parking management system that is correct for Alpharetta, and you'll hear me say that many times, that there is a way I believe we should do this, Alpharetta's way, and I'll talk a little bit about the differences of different styles of parking management that can occur. Then I'll walk you through this process that we've been a part of, this competitive procurement, make a recommendation, and then see what kind of questions you all have. And then highlight a little bit about why we're bringing the proposal to you tonight that is the proposal, so that you all will then give me direction as to where we go from here. So like I mentioned, I'll start with the end in mind. The end is that at the end of this, I hope we've built to a place that there's some direction from the City Council to say, it looks like that was a good procurement process. We're willing to entertain a contract at the next meeting for phase one. And so I'll get back to that in a minute, but that's where I'm trying to get to. This is a very different procurement than one we're used to doing. We're used to writing very specific procurement language and say, we want to buy a John Deere rake for our infield baseball fields at Wills Park. It's a very specific thing, that if you sell a John Deere Model ABC yard rake, it will work for our systems. This was a very different RFP because we were really more requesting a bid on a concept, and a concept and finding a partner that we thought we could roll this out with. Again, I'll go to the Alpharetta way. No longer are we in a place where you just go slap parking meters up and hope that all of a sudden, if you have people put their coins in it, that it's going to all of a sudden work for a downtown parking strategy. Number one, that's sidewalk clutter. Number two, technology is much advanced and taken its place, and you can actually use data and electronic tools to eliminate some of that clutter and have a system that works for you citywide, a system that addresses both on-street, surface, as well as parking deck enforcement. So just to give you a couple of the dates early on, just so you have ideas to how this process has gotten to where it is today. We went to bid on March the 7th, 2024. With the RFP, it was released. Responses due April the 11th, and we issued a notice of intent to award on June 28th. We had 3 responses in the RFP process, 3 very qualified firms, and I'll tell you, it really took to the oral interview, the presentation, to have one of the companies, in our estimation of those people that were in the room doing those interviews, essentially, to bring forward a recommendation to you all, that one stood out from the other 2. Parking systems can be operated many different ways, and I've been a part of running a parking system that was nothing but revenue-based, and it was nothing but intended to make sure that there was sufficient revenues to continue to run the system, maintain the decks, repair potholes in the parking lots, and to some degree maximize revenue by saying special event is here, we can make more this night, let's do fixed fee versus hourly. So I've been a part of just a revenue generating parking model. I don't think that works in Alpharetta, and I don't think that's what you all want. I think you all wanted, and you've articulated many times, that we need to be talking with our business community, talking with the owners, having this become a system that works ultimately for the community that we just happen to be the facilitators of, and that we can implement this without a lot of teeth gnashing or anger, that we actually can look and say, what are we trying to accomplish? And if we're trying to accomplish turnover in spots so that customers can have access to the businesses in an easier format, then that's the sign of a good system and sign that we're managing it correctly. We're not always coming right out of the box by saying either that we think a system should have fees in all circumstances, where there's ways to incentivize parking in some of the less desirable places that becomes much more affordable than those that are right in front of our downtown restaurants or businesses that we see cars parking and they're there for hours on end. Those are great spots for customers to use who come and visit us and then have a good experience in Alpharetta. So I can tell you that generally we called it downtown parking management. We sought proposals from vendors for on-street parking management services in the downtown area. Downtown was defined like we defined the downtown overlay, so exactly the same area. You might say, well, that's going to include Canton Street, and that's going to include Thompson Street, and that's going to get us down to beyond the Publix on Highway 9. The answer to that question is yes. Does that mean we're presupposed that we all of a sudden have to have some sort of a parking system in all those places? That'll be for the community and then ultimately you all as policy setters based upon recommendation to come up with. It might make sense to extend it into more of the residential areas. It may not. We may end up talking about residential parking permit programs. There's all sorts of things that can come out of that. We provided to the companies that wanted to propose a sample of the number of spaces we think we have, where they're located. They were able to do some basic data review based upon that. But now we come to our point that we're here today, and we've interviewed the 3 companies, we've looked at their technical proposals, and we're ready to come with a recommendation that we allow one of those companies to become our partner by contract and move forward with actually designing the system that we will implement. You'll hear a couple of times tonight about a 2-phase system. Phase 1 being the design of the parking plan, and that includes a lot of outreach and discussion with the community. I'll go through that here in a minute. And then to a phase 2, which will likely structure with a first rollout of on-street parking, some sort of parking plan, and then following that back up with both surface and deck as a phase 2. Questions thus far? I probably should check and see. I've got plenty more material to keep going with, but I want to make sure I haven't lost anybody yet.
Councilman Hypes.
Chris, thanks for bringing this forward. I got a 30,000-foot question. In terms of approach and perspective on this workshop and what we're doing, would the parking be primarily to meet our immediate and anticipated needs, or would the parking strategically be to accommodate for future growth?
I think the answer to that's yes.
But if you had to pick one, I mean, are we, from a numbers point of view, are we hurting on available parking right now or in the, immediate future, say within the next year? Conversely, as opposed to yes to both alternatives,
Sure.
is the amount and supply and location of the parking provided by the city, is it more geared toward future development, future growth?
So I think at this point, and I'm going to tell you that my data is based upon it being a user and then just intuitively spending a lot of time in the downtown. We don't have a lot of data counts right now as to who parks where when, other than we know that there's oftentimes when it's quite full. And one of the things in this phase 1 that I'm going to be proposing that we move forward with is multiple methods of data collection, whether that's technologically based in the form of camera data collection as well as drive-around collection of data. So if we move forward with this phase 1, then we will have a better answer as to, do we have a problem, what is it, and how bad is it? If I can, let me just run through some of these notes that I have in bringing to you a recommendation tonight. I want to tell you a little bit about the company.
Let me check just to make sure there weren't any other
sorry.
questions. Sorry to interrupt. I just want to make sure there wasn't.
No problem. We have some gentlemen in the audience tonight. Whether you choose to interact with them tonight or not is completely up to you. We don't have to. But I wanted them here in case you had any specific questions of them. And if we get to that, I'll let them introduce themselves. We're coming tonight with a recommendation that we enter into and have provided a notice to award to a company called Pivot Parking. So we'll talk about Pivot Parking tonight. Pivot is providing parking management services in 44 different locations. They happen to be an Alpharetta headquartered business. They exist in Avalon with their main headquarters. Their president comes to work every day in Alpharetta, yet they have parking services in many, many multiple cities across the Southeast. I can tell you that what intrigued me about them is they have a lot of experience on both sides of the equation. And when I say both sides of the equation, I mean they've had experience managing municipal parking systems as well as implementing parking systems on both from the public side and the private side. Mr. Means is in the audience tonight. He very instrumental in implementing and managing Lexington, Kentucky's parking system, for example. If you want him to talk a little bit about that tonight, he certainly can. But it was nice during the interview to learn that there was some large experience in this company that actually had a homegrown and hometown feel, and that many of the people that come to work for their company live in Alpharetta and are the same people that are enjoying the businesses downtown, and they understand and get us. They are somewhat of a boutique operator. I was really like the idea that they were technology agnostic, because I don't want to go into this. I would recommend we not go into this with a preconceived notion that we're going to go with Park Mobile, or that we're going to go with Pay to Park, or that we're going to, that we have some idea that there's a certain platform that's going to work for Alpharetta. I like the fact that we're starting the process being agnostic when it comes to technology. A lot of current contracts in place, and executives with a lot of prior experience was noted as we went through their proposal. Project approach was solid, and again included a significant amount of stakeholder input and interest, and that's going to come in the form of community forums, community meetings, even some one-on-one, door-to-door type interactions with our businesses and those that would be affected by this. I think that's really important that we give this that feel, and that this isn't something we're doing to anybody, but something that we're doing with our community to make sure that it matches what we're looking for in Alpharetta. They did mention a couple of things in the proposal that were of interest to me, and one was that we could explore, if we needed to at some point in the future, a residential parking permit program. Sometimes there is a conflict between residential areas that also share areas with commercial and retail, and that the retail customers all of a sudden come and take that front spot in front of somebody's townhome in our downtown residential area. And if we wanted to go to some sort of a residential parking permit program so that we kept those spaces available for those that were adjacent to them, we could look at that. Also explore the opportunity of valet parking and whether or not that makes any sense in Alpharetta, and I've seen that in a couple of places where you can go from all aspects and spectrums of what the parking opportunity is, as well as there was even some discussion on creating a benefit district, which is any of the revenues that might be accumulated as a result of parking enforcement or anything in the downtown area, that we have a direct benefit plan to invest those dollars back into the area in which it was collected, to make the downtown area the recipient of some of those dollars. So we haven't taken the perspective that we're going into this hoping that it's this massive revenue gain. We've been more looking at trying to figure out how we solve for quality parking in Alpharetta. As far as outreach, they anticipate and suggested they would do workshops, forums, and meetings. I've already mentioned this door-to-door, some educational campaigns, and even some mobile outreach type events. What I equate that to in my head is getting a tent at the farmers market in the summer out here in front of City Hall, and just generally interacting with people who might want to learn more about this thing known as downtown parking that's coming to life. They do have and would be available to us a smart parking platform. I talked a little bit about that earlier, about the street clutter and what it looks like to have all sorts of kiosks or meters on your sidewalk. They are strategically positioned so that the technology that would be a part of this program would most likely be in the form of handheld devices or other things that you can use on your phone. That's the way most parking systems have gone, even to where some of the more sophisticated ones have interacted with Apple Pay, and there's ways to even take a transaction and make it easy through the use of smart platforms. I will say that just because they put it in their proposal, that if we choose to want meters in certain places, that they're capable of doing that. Like, we may say, we really think this is a ripe area for the parking meter. Nothing's really jumping out at me at this point where I think that makes sense. But if we come across it, we have not given up on, or we haven't gone beyond their capability by saying everything is more focused strategically on a smart platform. I was impressed with the fact that we talked a lot about an ambassador approach and not just, I even anticipate that these will be parking ambassadors, not parking enforcement agents, officers. You put the suffix there. But if we do this right, and I think we will and can, the people that are out making sure that things are moving around in our downtown can even be ambassadors of us. So highlighted a lot of being service-based, inclusive. They want a focused investment in advancement to stay on the forefront of the industry. That was important to me too, that we weren't going to implement technology that never increased, that would stay. It's always that discussion, do you want to be on the bleeding edge or the cutting edge? I'm usually better at the cutting edge than the bleeding edge, especially when it comes to technology, because typically you don't want to be the test ground for those types of things. But as long as there's a commitment to continuing to advance that, I think that that's great. And I'll end by just giving a conclusion on their company, that they've had on their team over 200 cumulative years of experience in dealing with parking in certain communities. Let me tell you some of the cities that they've currently have contracts in and some of the other places that they've always worked, just to give you some magnitude. Current municipal contracts indicate to be Wilmington, North Carolina, Surf City, North Carolina, North Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, Wrightsville Beach, North Carolina. I'm figuring out how they can bring us a beach to Alpharetta, if that's possible. But Carolina Beach, Surfside Beach, and have done some work previously in the city of Macon, Charlotte, Myrtle Beach, Beaufort, South Carolina, Fort Myers, Florida, Louisville, Kentucky, Lexington, Kentucky. So they've got some, it's not a company that is, even though they're right down the street, they're not testing out their ability to manage parking on the city of Alpharetta. We've worked with them at this point and said, gosh, we have to get from this conceptual thing to something I can actually take to the city council to execute, because again, it's real easy to bring you a contract for a fire truck, but it's more difficult to bring you a contract for an abstract concept of planning something. We've worked with the team that negotiated with them to come up with a phase 1 and a phase 2. Phase 1 we're calling the Develop and Implement an On-Street Parking Management Plan. In that, and if you were to approve a contract that we would bring next week, it would deal with the initial planning and contract engagement. We would be defining the scope of service and contract negotiations. That's what we're in right now. Develop goals, scope. We're talking through that now. It's hard to continue to do a lot of that talking until you have a contract in place. Obviously, this process would include the needs assessment, community outreach, then the bulk of the project, which is the parking management plan development. Would get into areas of on-street versus surface versus deck, what type of staffing might be needed to be able to bring this type of program online, define parking zones and rates. The ever popular and important discussion on loading zones would be a part of that discovery, so that we could work on interacting trucks with cars so it makes sense, outlining technology solutions, developing the procurement plan, initiating discussions and technology partners. I'm not just going to read this list, but I'll tell you basically it brings us from where we are today to something that we feel strongly we can put a price to implement. And that will be a price that not only just says we're going to pay for certain services, but that would be a price that would look at where we think revenues might be, what type of revenue offsets there might be. As you know, we already have a parking fund established, and that was established when the downtown was being contemplated and built. There's, I think, about $200,000 in it. I would be bringing to you next week a contract that would include all of this plan development, as well as a public awareness campaign and a technology and infrastructure activation, so we could decide what type of technology we would use. We would be ready to implement, and that's what this phase 1 does, is brings us to where we take the next 28 weeks, for example, next 6 to 7 months. We work through the different seasons of the parking year. We start to really collect data, either through cameras or through on-the-ground data collection, analyze that, put a plan together that makes some sense to be able to then bring back a phase 2 to you all that would say, okay, we feel that this is right for Alpharetta, now we're ready to see it happen in action. There's really no way to compare the costs of what is being proposed to do other than to do some, and candidly, I've done these several times, and the cost doesn't necessarily jump out me and shock me, because I do think we have to make an investment to get to a place that we can say it's either worth implementing or not. But I would be bringing forward a contract next week at a cost not to exceed $53,197, and that would get us all the way through being ready to pull the trigger and start to put these things in place in Alpharetta. I am happy to answer any questions on anything I've presented tonight. I'm also happy to introduce to you the Pivot team if you have questions for them. Again, know that this was a bit of a complicated process to get even to this discussion because I didn't quite know how to get here. I think we've gotten here at a good place, at least, and I'll be quiet now and take questions and would seek your support next week if you direct me to bring a contract forward.
Councilman Will?
Chris, the 53,000, what exactly is that for? Because, and I guess conceptually, long-term, is this a revenue generator for the city, or are we continually paying money to keep this program going?
It could be either. And that's why I alluded to the fact that I've run revenue-generating systems before, but they don't take on necessarily the same feel of a system that would be interested in doing a lot of feedback as to what the businesses would want or what would be helpful to the community. For example, we would be making, if we were a revenue system only, we would say on the 4th of July that we would jack the rates up to a $40 flat fee for everybody coming to watch the fireworks. And we would make a ton of money on the 4th of July. We would do the same thing for wire and wood, but that's that strong revenue model. We could do that if we're just truly trying to run a business with the parking system. But if we're trying to run a system that is complementary to the downtown businesses, I think because of the number of spaces we have, I don't want to mislead you that I think that this can be a self-funding system. That I think we are going to pay some over time. I just don't know what that sum is yet because we don't have designed what we think. We don't have anything designed beyond just going and throwing out some kiosks and some meters and seeing what kind of money they bring in.
So what does the 53,000 cover?
It covers the needs assessment, community outreach, the whole plan, parking management plan development, the whole plan. So at the end of that, we will know what we want to implement, what it will cost, what the ongoing costs will be, what the anticipated revenues are, a public awareness campaign, and a pursuit of a technology and infrastructure activation plan.
So is this 53,000 go to Pivot for them to do it, or are we spending it and we're doing it, and it's irrelevant who we pick at the end of the day?
This, if you award this, it would go to Pivot and they would do it.
So we give them 53,000, they do all that work,
That's correct.
and then they bring us back the proposal. So we are essentially picking them if we do that.
We have to pick, yes, if we do that, we have to pick one of the three. Now, they could bring back a phase one proposal and we say, yeah, that looks implementable. And I don't think this would be the case, but I think it would be an option. That there's no absolute guarantee to a phase two. That if phase one would become our work product and we could then take phase one and do with it as we chose. My hope is that we would end up finding that it made sense, that we picked correctly on the front end and that phase one did become phase two. But I don't think you're committing yourself beyond phase one if you approve this contract.
So my understanding conceptually, again, is this is not, we're not punching holes in sidewalks and putting in meters. This is all, we're putting one sign up that says all these spots have to be done on your phone, and that's how you're going to pay for it. So does that give us any long-term maintenance costs that we would have to absorb as well for any of the things that are happening?
Yeah, I mean, any of the systems we put in place, there's going to be some carry cost. There's whether that carry cost comes in the form of we need to take a parking meter head out because now the technology's got so much better that the screens on them are better, you can see them better in the sun, we need to put a new head on. That's a long-term maintenance cost. Very similar to if we go technology-based, and probably most systems have a combination of both. There will be updates and things that happen along the way. We may decide that, after we get this first thing implemented, we get the on-street done, and we get the parking decks done, and we get the surface parking lots done, that we want some sort of wayfinding system in our parking decks. And then that would be a future, the old Avalon model where you come in and you see a red light, a green light, or a blue light. There's ways to continue to build on this. This phase one gets us further than we've ever been before, which was a Kimley Horn report that says, yeah, you've got a parking problem in downtown.
So 53 goes to them. They're going to do the study. At the end of the day, they're going to bring us back a proposal. The proposal could be all digital. It could be a combination of digital and whatevers. Potentially, there's very little to, potentially, there's a lot of ongoing maintenance that would have to be covered. And right now, this could be a money loser or a money maker for the city. This is where we are.
Yeah, you've summarized about how ambiguous this is right now. But it's that way, and I don't know how it can be any other way unless I were to just start implementing something. Sure. I think this is a more strategic, more advantageous way to say, okay, we know we can afford $53,000. I'm not saying that we shouldn't value the value of every dollar, but that's well within the parking dollars that are already collected in the budget. it will get us to a place where the Kimley Horn report got us, love Kimley Horn, but they got us to a place of saying you need to study it further. And rather than continuing to study it, that's why we went this RFP route, was to say, okay, I want to be able to tell the city council that we're going to spend dollars that get us to execution.
Was there any examples of another city our size that have implemented this program that we could take a look at what it cost them and how it worked out?
Yeah, we could. I don't have that. I don't have that at my fingertips right now, but yes, we could.
I would say Macon is approximately the same size as Alpharetta population-wise and downtown-wise.
I guess I would, and that's good. I would like to see what Pivot has done in a city of our size, so what their costs are and what their procedures are. You know what I mean? As opposed to if somebody else did Macon, it's completely different than them, then it's not going to be terribly relevant to us. But, yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Councilman Dorito?
Thank you, Mayor, and Chris, thank you to you and your staff for pulling this all together. I know it's not easy. This obviously is already, I think, a very important topic for the city. I'm going to be perfectly transparent right up front. I don't think I'm ready to vote on something like this by next Monday. I have so many questions here from just your presentation, and I'll go through just a couple of thoughts here. You referred to the three, what I'd say, vendors that you interviewed for for this project, and it seems very, at least right now, it seems very cloudy to me as to what the specifications of what we're actually asking for. And so I don't know how 3, 4, 10 vendors could bid on the same project with the same credentials and the same history with other municipalities, that sort of thing, without understanding fully what a specific RFP looks like and have them respond to the best of their ability and ultimately, you know, with a projected price course. I feel better if it went out for bid. I think it's a very critical project. I think it's critical, not just, seems like a lot of the discussion, and maybe just unintentional, but it led toward these digital parking meters, or whatever you want to call them. I'd like to know how they're going to be enforced, understand that. I'd like to understand, you know, in the, I would say, feasibility study, or whatever you're calling the assessment for $53,000. I think the council needs to have a discussion on delivery. We talked about this in the past, to the businesses down there. When I was in Italy this summer, and I think I shared with a couple of my members on the council, I kind of watched, I was staying in Sorrento, I kind of watched how the downtown Sorrento area did all their deliveries. A lot of shops, a lot of restaurants, a lot of walking pedestrians. And they limited shopping or deliveries to very early morning hours. They were done by 10 o'clock. But they allowed them in alleyways. They allowed them, they used smaller vehicles to kind of not overwhelm with big trucks and that sort of thing. So my point being is, I'd like to have a discussion on the delivery of goods to help our businesses downtown so that it doesn't become any more exacerbated problem. Focusing on the parking element is good, but we also have to focus in concert with that, I believe, on how we're going to accommodate our businesses down there for, you know, delivery hours that they can get their goods in their facilities and be able to kind of sell to the public whatever they're in the business of doing. I also wonder if the assessment would, how do we assess those residents or even people from outside the city who decide not to come to city center because of the parking situation? I think that's a big thing we need to consider as far as developing a parking plan that may not solve the problem fully, and I don't think we can ever solve the problem fully because, as I've already said, if you build something that's successful, you're going to attract more people, and it's just going to continue to be a problem long term. But what I mean is, you know, how do we make the city center a viable economic area for people to want to come here and not feel, you know what, I'm not going to go down there. I'm going to have to deal with the traffic, and there's never no parking and that sort of thing. So I think we have to kind of deal with that concept as well. I don't know if the current parking situation, when you start talking to business owners and, whatever, if the meter thing is the right solution, I don't know yet, but that's part of the assessment, I guess, right? And then I mentioned the enforcement situation. The ambassador approach, I'm assuming that's volunteers, or we'd be paying people to be ambassadors downtown, city center. So that's an additional course that needs to be considered. I think it's already touched upon by Councilman Will about he'd like to see similar municipalities that particularly Pivot, you referred to, does this for, or any other vendor we might consider. Because a lot of the things you talked about was beach communities, which is a completely different kind of parking concept in beach communities. So, we're kind of we're causing the problem because of our success here in the city, and I think we have to really. My point being is, I can't support even an assessment yet. This is really the first conversation we're having to talk about how do we address the parking dilemma we have here in downtown in totality, and make sure that we're, as Councilman Hypes, I think his question kind of alluded to, what about the future as things continue to grow down here? Or how do we keep it a viable economic center of the city by not allowing parking to basically shut down the businesses or the lack thereof? So I do think the plan has to be greater than just digital meters or ambassadors. I think we really got to think through this, because whatever we decide today and we put a plan into place, I'd like to see it to be as, successful as possible, knowing that we're always going to have limitations no matter what. It's not going to be a 100% foolproof plan that solves every problem. I did not see the Kimberly Horn report. I don't know when that was done, maybe before my time. Yeah, I'd like to read that and see that, what they, and yeah, different times, Mayor, so 6 years ago was.
Primarily an assessment of how much parking we have downtown.
Correct.
Oh, okay. And obviously, a lot has changed in 6 years downtown. So,
Mr. Mayor, if I could, your microphone, please.
So,
My
so
apologies.
it might not even be that relevant anymore, Mayor, is my point, 6 years ago. I don't know. But.
Mayor, you okay if could I respond to a couple of those
Please.
points? So I just want to clarify a couple things. So this was bid. So that's how we are as a result of today, is we did take to the market a bid.
Okay. I don't mean to interrupt, Chris, but how did you bid it? With an actual RFP?
So we bid it as an RFP, yes. And we put as many parameters in it as we could put so that we could get an apples-to-apples comparison without telling the parking community how they should do it. And the thought concept here was that every one of the points you made, I think, are great points, and we need to do those things. The thought was that we would go competitively and find a company or companies that have the 200 years of parking experience to help us navigate through defining some of those things you brought up. Absolutely. Do I think we need a loading zone discussion? Absolutely. Do we need to talk about delivery hours? Absolutely. Do we need to talk about rates, if any? Absolutely. Do we need to look at models of enforcement, be it electronic, be it physical, be it virtual, be it all of the different ways? Absolutely. And that's the bid we did to get to this point where we were able to compare three companies side by side. And it's as objective as you can make a very subjective process. I'll be the first one to admit that I was a part of the review process. We had others that were part of the review process. And yes, there's no way to say if you score 4, then you get 3 points. But the thought here was that we would insert the competitiveness into it so that we could get to a lawful procurement, so that we could say, yeah, for phase 1 and doing all those things that you just mentioned, this is the expert that we want to work with. Because candidly, I've got a lot of experts on our staff, but I don't have a parking expert. And so we go to the external. We go to the Kimley Horns. We go to the other large planning firms that would do some type of a parking study like this. And we rely upon them to tell us what the time is by using our own watch. They give us this report that says, you got all this different parking in downtown Alpharetta, but nothing's actionable. And that was the difference that we were hoping to provide with this process, was we did do a bid, and if you all were to feel comfortable, you're not agreeing to putting technology out there by moving forward at phase one. You're not agreeing to there being certain loading zones. You're not agreeing to times. You're not even agreeing to put a parking process into place. I just haven't been able yet to give you something that you could look at and say, that makes sense for Alpharetta, or no, it doesn't. And that's all that this would get us to that place where you could make a more informed decision. If I didn't articulate that, I apologize.
Do you know offhand what the other bids were, what they came in at?
It was not it was a bid, it was bids that were compared based upon I could tell you what we compared them on, but cost was not one of the preliminary, drivers. We went on project team experience, their implementation plan and technical capabilities, their references, and their presentation. Candidly, the presentation is what has us in this position tonight, because the presentation is what caused one of the companies to significantly, in my mind, stand out from the other two.
For the record, because I don't know where they are, someone's in the audience you referred to from Pivot. I do like the fact that if we can ever engage a California Alpharetta company, that we should do that if they meet all our specs and win a competitive bid process. Sounds like you did that. I just have, I guess that the devil's in the details is basically what I'm saying.
Understood.
I don't know if I'll be ready to vote for this next week.
Okay. If I can, Mr. Mayor, just so that they're not wondering who's in the room, let me introduce Robert Sizik, who's sitting in the front row. He just waved his hand. Gary Means is next to him, and Stephen Taft next to him. And Gary was the one I mentioned in the middle who we had fun talking about parking in Lexington, but there is represented there on that row some significant years of experience and implementation in the world that we either need to make a decision we want to get into or we don't.
So Chris, could I just ask, since they are a local firm, would there be an opportunity for any of the council members, Councilman Dorito or anyone else, to have a conversation with you and their team? Does that violate any?
At this point, since we've issued a notice of intent to award, which we had to do to get here, because I couldn't, even if we don't award, I had to issue one to somebody. I think I can let me look at Mr. Harris real quick and just make sure we don't have the cones of silence that I used to deal with before coming to this organization. I don't know that it would be inappropriate at this point to allow the city council to meet with you, me, and Pivot, who's being proposed by us as a recommendation, correct? Close. It is close.
Tom, I need you on the record.
Tom Harris, Director of Finance, Mayor and Council, to answer that question. I think I'm going to turn a little bit to legal, but because it's standard language in RFP, I think that Deb Westbrook is the one they need to reach out to and not speak to council until it's awarded.
I'm trying to pull it.
And I was going to lean towards, yes, that we gave a notice of award generally, but this is the first time this has ever been asked of us in this limbo period.
I think without having it in front of me, my answer is if y'all could let me look into it and then report back to Chris so that he can give you a final answer. I have some reservations about it, though, but would like to look at the documents.
That's fine. That's why I asked. So my concern at this point is we've been trying to do this for, like I said, 6 years ago we did an assessment. And so I don't want us to get bogged down any more than we need to. And I'm trying to find a way for Councilman Dorito and anyone else on this city council to get answers to their questions to prevent us from dragging this out for another month or 2 months, because we're just talking about trying to come up with a plan. So that, do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly can work with them to provide the answers to you of any questions you have and through that process.
That, and let me tell you, we always ultimately have the option that if we were to award a contract for this phase one, we're not implementing anything as a result of this. It's awarding a study. If it goes so terribly south that we did the wrong thing, we have language in our contract that allows a fairly easy escape hatch.
Correct.
And that's on any of our contracts. So we wouldn't necessarily be doing anything that would be that difficult to resolved if for some reason it was a terrible decision, which I don't think it would be, and I don't envision that at all. But I think we'll let Molly weigh in on whether or not she thinks that that can occur pre or post contract award. And I would certainly love for anybody who needs to get a comfort level with it to have that opportunity.
Yeah, Mayor, I'm not trying to make this complicated, okay? Because this is an important decision, I think, at least for me. If there's a document that outlines what Pivot is going to do, I know you said up to 53, and you don't really have a solid price yet, but you thought around that price. The price is not the issue to me. It's the, what are we actually getting for that money? And is it going to give us a blueprint with various options that will help us solve our parking problems, both
And that
short-term
document is
and
done.
long-term in the city? And if that document does that, I will research it and educate myself on it before the meeting and be prepared to vote on it.
So we do have that document completed. It would come as the attachment A to the contract. The reason I didn't publish it, and I indicated that by email, is simply because we weren't at the point of seeking a council vote. So I didn't want to put a bunch of documents out there that could further jeopardize the procurement that we are still in the middle of. So yes, Councilman Dorito, I'd even be happy to ship that over to the city council as quick as tonight so that you could start your review. And if it doesn't go at the next meeting and we need 2 meetings or 3 meetings to figure out that that's the right timeline, we'll go when we're ready to go and when you all are ready to go. If you all get ready to go.
Thanks, sir. Councilman Mitchell.
Thank
And then Councilman Hypes after that.
Okay. We have, as a council, been talking about this for at least, I agree with the mayor, and for at least 6 or more years, talking about the problems with parking downtown and how are we fare with our businesses and everybody. And we've talked in tangential terms, and always it's like, well, we need some pros to come in. And I guess we were all hoping that the Kimberly Horn recommendation would come with a little more meat in it but it did identify the great need that we have. And in light of that, I would like to hear from Pivot. I've not met you all or whatever. I assume no one on council. Can I just hear what you've done in Lexington or a similar city or Macon or wherever? Can I hear what the process that we're facing was like for that city and what we hope to gain from it?
So let me check with legal to make sure.
What our policy basically says is from the issuance of the RFP until the time of the city council contract award is a period of no communication with those that are going to make the award. I'll defer to our city attorney. I don't object to, you may say it doesn't matter if you object or if you consent, and it is what it is. I would not object to them briefly discussing, I'm here trying to figure out how to get this procurement process through a process, and we don't do it like this all the time, so.
But we have the entire council here in an open work session, so I don't see the harm, is there?
Well, the issue is that I'm looking at, and Tom, I know y'all haven't done this before, I don't think it says that the no communication period lasts until the city council meeting for contract award recommendation, or until the contract award if this isn't required to go before council.
Well, I can make the recommendation that I'm making. I am recommending it. So.
It's on the agenda for next week, but he's already made the recommendation to you here in this meeting. So I think it's been recommended. The contract isn't on your agenda until next week, so I think I can get there.
And I think the risk is worth taking to allow them to speak to the city council.
As long as it's legal, I'm fine with that.
Can you then describe your experience and what this next step would be like for our city, and what are some concrete measures we can hope to gain from if we enter into this? Sure. Thank you.
Thank you first, Councilmember Mitchell and the rest of the council and mayor. We're honored to be here, and I represent the rest of our team. It's an honor to be here, and your question is really great, but I think I'll speak to it, but I think what we want to try to say and what Chris was conveying is that this is still a study about Alpharetta. What does Alpharetta need? What are the challenges? So let me start there, and then I'll talk a little bit about some of our experience. So it is things like loading zones. Do we need longer loading zones for box trucks and beer trucks and Cisco's and things like that? Do we need more shorter, regular gig economy type loading zones? Does this block need more loading zones or less than this block? based on the needs. Is all-day parking a bad thing? Should it just be 3 hours like some of your signs are? Is 1 hour good? These are things that we need to know, right? So the way to get that is doing data collection from digital ways of doing it, driving around, cameras, gathering data, how long do people stay, where are they going, and then also surveys, so public outreach. We would survey businesses with certain types of questions. You know, what types of loading needs do you have? How long do your visitors usually stay? Do you pay for parking somewhere for your employees, or where do they park? And then to visitors, how often do you come downtown? Have you ever come downtown and not been able to find a space and drove back home? So it's really about getting people from point A, maybe at home, to point B, the place that they're hoping to go spend some money, and are they having challenges getting there? And getting all that data put together, we would come up with a plan. I mean, sure, we can sit here and say, we've had success doing this or that in other communities, and I'll talk a minute about that. But we want to get that data gathered from your community. What are the pain points here? What are the challenges here? Come up with a plan. And part of our team that's not here is we also engaged a consultant who's done more than 200 of these types of studies to be a part of our team. So while we're a parking operator that does consulting, we felt Alpharetta really needed an approach that wasn't just an operator who has rolled out things. We do know how to make money in parking, but maybe this program doesn't necessarily make money because of what we find as we do the outreach. In Lexington, and just the other thing, in any municipal parking environment is always an evolution. You can't just like buy a fire truck or buy radios for the police department and you plan it and you run. So it's going to be an evolution, and you want to start off with baby steps towards whatever the end goal. And part of the end goal may be at some point, hey, you've got these parking facilities that you all built, and as they age, they're going to take millions of dollars of repair work to keep them. You know, the difference between a parking garage and a building is buildings have roofs and windows. Parking garages get all the wear and tear and all the weather, and they're going to need some support at some point. That'll be your all's decision, though. Do you want to raise money to help pay for these things by people that are using the parking assets, and then that requires a charge? Maybe this is just an enforcement play. We're having problems with turnover, so we need better enforcement. We need to force, with behavioral implementations, people who have been staying all day over into the parking lot or the parking garage. Maybe it's just enforcement that will require that. And that's the kind of thing that the study will help us bring out. And again, you can phase these things in over time, figure out where we're going. And I think to the first question, Councilmember Hypes, about is this a future, you can build off this. Maybe at some point another parking garage is needed, but that's not what we're talking about now, but this starts that development plan for down the road. In Lexington, we did things like, there's a coffee shop that has problems with a nearby school. The teachers are all parking in front of it. So we implemented, they wanted just free and enforcement, and at some point, meters were required, but we put in a 15-minute and push a button and you get 15 minutes for, they were worried about, well, we have so many people on their way into downtown stopping and just getting a cup of coffee. So you can look at little things like that and say, well, in this area, it makes sense to only be, free for an hour or free for 15 minutes or 3-hour parking like you all have. We went from old school meters when we first rolled out the program to digital meters to kiosks to pay-only app areas. So it's whatever the community is interested in, what they have a tolerance level for if you go that route. But I think what we're really talking about in the beginning is how do we do a better job managing your curb? It's not just parking, it's also deliveries. It's really curb management is really what we're talking about. Does that help you?
It does, thank you.
Councilman Hype?
Chris doesn't know, that's why we're having to hire.
There's talking about parking discussion 6 years ago, and I sat in this room out in those seats 6, 8 years ago where we talked about parking lots A, B, or parking decks A, B, and C, and it generated tremendous interest from the public. Some cities are blessed to have many, many people come to their council meetings, and others are blessed not to have very many people come to their council meetings. But whichever way you see it, that generated a lot of interest. And I hear in your remarks about surveys and what the community wants. And what I want as part of this workshop is for you guys, if we pass this vote when it comes up, if you guys do your job, that you're getting information from the community that gets back to us. And then secondly, that we've got a process, multi-layered process, including here in this room, where people have an opportunity to tell us what they think. It's not to say that based off of good information from you, I would agree with what some business owners or some downtown residents like me might think, but I want to know what they think. And I want to know what they think unfiltered. So if you, if you're doing surveys and community input and interviews or whatever that is, I need to know what those results are and how they're getting to me so that it's not result-oriented from what you're trying to accomplish for us. Okay?
Councilman Dorito.
Sir, it's a question for you. You made reference on your initial comments that you hired a third-party outside consultant. I'm paraphrasing. Does that person or entity bring different skill sets to the table that Pivot doesn't have?
I would say yes. I would answer that as yes. They have much more experience as a non-operator. We are an operator that does consulting. They only do consulting. So they're thinking about working with the community, like I said, he's been involved with at least 200 surveys and studies and implementation of plans similar to this in municipal and university settings. So that level of consulting experience is different than what we would bring to the table. We've been more on the, and I guess I would go back to compliment the staff on how this approach happened is you can't write a scope like for a fire truck or radios like I mentioned before when you don't know exactly what you need. We are also used to answering RFPs that say, here's the scope. We want you to put 5 people out, or we want this, we love this kind of meter, or we don't want meters, we only want enforcement. So
you're more,
the combination of us and this consultant.
Side of consulting of this assessment, whatever, that implementing a system that moves traffic, moves.
Help people get from point A to point B.
Kind of perception of what
exactly
you do versus the consultant gets more into the questionnaires, the analysis, the assessment that's what they do mainly in life.
Yes.
And you mentioned universities and things that.
Sure.
That.
Town hall meetings, things like that.
Would there be any, and you probably don't know this yet till you get into the assessment, but could there be some feedback on whether or not the city center would, in the future, look at trying to identify locations for additional parking decks?
Yes, I mean, I can't speak outside of what the staff were looking for in this first generation of this work, but that's the way we would think about an approach like this. It's a program that should be thinking out 5 years, 10 years.
One more question. Have you seen partnerships? And this is just, I'm just using this, I'm not suggesting this is what we would ever do, but with the high school that's over there, where we get into a partnership, put a parking deck on their parking area, but share it with the city and the school.
Yes.
Okay.
Smart communities will figure those kinds of things out, and we've seen that happen.
I do think we have different options that we
Oh,
can
yeah.
think about. But,
Churches.
all right, thank you.
Yep.
Councilman Brady has been very patient. I apologize for the delay.
I'd just like to comment a little bit on 2 things, and a little bit to you and also to Chris, a little bit on sensitivity. One is I want to definitely resonate that Councilman Hypes and the report, the expectation of the report is to be non-biased, right? That this is a road to continued revenue through a partnership that leans one way. I think that there'd be significant disappointment there. The other side, Chris, is just like to compliment you a little bit because this is an extremely sensitive issue, and walking through it with the discretion that you've gone through and the ambiguity of not placing significance or a vision on it could create somewhat of a flashpoint, with residents and the community. If you start to say we're suddenly charging for this and started leaning away with a vision, that flashpoint would come back without knowing all the answers. And I think the delivery of the information and having that data, it goes back to the layman's terms of we don't know what we don't know. And, we have to go find out what this is and then to kind of create a path forward and a vision forward into what that is, right? You talk, we have a capacity problem, we have a management problem, we have a technology, where can we make those enhancements in kind of different pieces? So I just wanted to welcome that. I know we spend money on engineers' reports, we spend money on design reports and all sorts of stuff, but I think getting the information today is we'll be not making a decision in a vacuum later as these are coming to us. At least we know more, and then we can be presented with, solutions as they kind of come. So just want to say that I appreciate the discussion and appreciate the partnership. So thank you.
Any other questions from council at this time? So this is just a work session. It was to get a sense of council, to know whether we can come forward with the actual business item. So does anyone object to at least leaving that agenda set for next Monday at this point? We can always retract it if we decide that that's not the way we want to go.
We can, and I also had a quick little discussion with the city attorney here because we've interpreted it tonight that there's been a recommendation made, which is what allowed this conversation with Pivot to occur, that really sort of opens the door that if any of you all now feel as though you'd really like to drill into it more to get your own level of understanding with it, I think that there would now not be a conflict with you doing that directly with Pivot. My only request, just so I can stay up to speed with what's being discussed, is that unless you just so object to it, would be willing to allow either the finance director or me to tag along and just hear the conversation. I would appreciate it. So if any of y'all need that, we're happy to help it become scheduled. And we've had both virtual as well as local meetings with the Pivot team. So technology can be our friend, and it can also happen in person if it needs to.
Okay, so we're not voting on this tonight. We're not making a final decision, but does anyone object to moving forward with that direction for now? Chris, I appreciate your efforts on this and your entire team.
Thank you.
I really think you've been thorough and not committed to a course of action, which allows us to assume all that possibility. So thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you all.
So Chris, where would you like to proceed from here? To the executive session?
Mr. Mayor, yes, I would. I'd like to proceed to the executive session. The topic tonight is personnel.
Okay, so we would need a motion.
Motion to adjourn to executive session, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
Do we have a second?
I second.
Okay, all those in favor of recessing, friendly amendment, recess into executive session? You said adjourn, but all those in favor, please vote yes.
Can't.
And it does pass unanimously. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back shortly.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We'll get started in just a few minutes. Just to let you know, we are coming out of an executive session, so there's going to be a weird little transition that takes place. You'll see council come out. They will formally adjourn an executive session, adjourn the meeting we've been in. Then we'll take about 5 to 10 minutes because I have a bunch of tech that I have to swap over, and then we'll actually begin the meeting that you're here for. So thank you for your patience. We'll begin momentarily.
We ready? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Not your first rodeo, clearly.
Welcome to this evening's meeting of the Alpharetta City Council. We appreciate you all coming to join us today. Bit of a rowdy crowd. So we'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. I'll note for the record that we've got all our council present and accounted for.
Mr. Mayor, I hate to interrupt. Before we do that, we need to go through the motions of just adjourning the work session and then,
Well, I was also going to mention, I was waiting for our other council members
got it. Okay.
before we did that.
Got it. Okay. Sounds good.
That's okay. Do we have a motion to reconvene?
Motion to reconvene.
Have a motion by Councilman Hype, second by Councilman Will. All those in favor of reconvening this city council meeting, please vote yes. And it does pass unanimously. So officially, we are in the meeting. And I'll note that we are all present and accounted for at city council. And as always, we begin our meetings with the Pledge of Allegiance. So if you're willing and able, please stand and join us. Thank you, everyone. And the first item on our agenda this evening is presentations. And this proclamation will be for the Alpharetta Gymnastics Association. If Ms. Lindsay Pritchard and Director Rogers, if you can meet me up front, please. Councilman Hypes, if you'll join me.